Hello, I'm Sumi Somaskanda. From the BBC World Service, this is The Global Story. Today, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump offer voters two starkly different views on climate change. In just 5 weeks' time, one of them will be elected president of the United States, one of the world's biggest producers of fossil fuels and carbon emissions. Their climate strategy could reshape American industry, innovation, and economy, and define the international response to the crisis. So what would a Harris or Trump White House mean for climate action at home and around the world? And crucially, what do voters think about where the candidates stand on climate change? Today, in the second of our special pre-election reports looking at America's place in the world, I'm speaking to the BBC's climate editor, Justin Rowlatt, who is in Cardiff today. Hi, Justin.
Very happy to speak to you. Good to speak to you, Sumi.
Great to have you, Justin. And with me right here in Washington is the BBC's Carl Nasman. He covers U.S. climate issues. Hey, Carl.
Great to be here. Hi.
So, Carl, I want to start with you because there are some election issues that are difficult to kind of really make tangible. But climate change is something that you have to say millions of Americans are now having to face head on.
Climate change, I think, year after year has just become so much more visible and obvious to people in the United States, where maybe 10 years ago or so, it wasn't quite at that point. But in 2024, I mean, it was pretty striking. We saw at least 20 different weather or climate related events that caused at least $1 billion in damage per event. I mean, so you're talking about wildfires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, these sorts of things. You know, we've seen lots of wildfires this year too. And then, you know, we saw these heat waves this year, like you mentioned, across the country, and probably, you know, something you noticed here in Washington, D.C. too.
Absolutely.
It was hot this year, this summer, as it always is. But I think it was something like more than 50 days in Washington, D.C., above 90 degrees or more. That's 32 degrees Celsius. And just walking around was almost impossible. And you realize that it's not just hurricanes or these big events that really affect your life. I mean, climate change affects your day-to-day. And by the end of the summer, you look up and you think, well, I haven't gone for a walk in the park. I haven't gone to a baseball game. I haven't done these things that normally I would do during the summer because it's just too hot. So I think a lot of Americans now are experiencing climate change in one way or another.
You know, I actually had a family holiday in the US and we drove an electric vehicle through the deep south. That's a story in itself. But the car prompted a discussion with people, you know, as I was standing waiting for it to charge. Kind of everyone I spoke to kind of appeared to accept the underlying science of climate change and that it was a real thing. We didn't stray that much into discussions about how to tackle the problem, which is where the political debate is. But there's a growing consensus that it is an issue and something that America needs to tackle.
It is a very contentious political issue. We're going to talk about the specifics of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's climate policies. But Carl, if we look at the big picture, they speak about climate change in very different ways, don't they?
They do. I don't think they could talk about climate change in a more different way. With Donald Trump, we all know, dating back to the first time he ran for president, he's been calling climate change a hoax. He's called it a Chinese hoax. Now he's really framing it more as kind of a bad deal.
It will collapse. Our economy will be starved of energy by Crooked Joe's vindictive Green New Scam. It's a Green New Scam. It'll be the destruction of our country.
I think what he's trying to do is frame green energy and the fight against climate change as something that might be bad for the country in terms of the economy. In many ways, if you look at the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration taking office in 2020, I mean, this has really been one of the most aggressive climate agendas that we've seen from any president. He was able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. That was in 2022. Kamala Harris, as she likes to say on the campaign trail, cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. Their administration have pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050, a very aggressive goal for the United States, and trying to reach 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. That's only, about 10 years from now? So some pretty aggressive stuff from President Biden, from Vice President Harris. It should be said, though, of course, that they're still not on track to meet the global goals, the country's goals of getting to net zero by 2050. And that is the thing that scientists say is the most important.
And Carl, a point to be made is that these were policies led by President Biden. Kamala Harris is now the one at the top of the ticket. And if you look at what she said, she really appears to be walking a bit of a tightrope. I mean, she says that she is committed to fighting climate change and supporting clean energy policies, but she's also trying to reassure the fossil fuel industry here in the US.
Honestly, I think what a lot of people would say is she would be a continuation of President Biden. She would continue to build on the policies that he's put in place. But you're right. I mean, she has really been walking a fine line. She's speaking notably to voters in Pennsylvania, the most important swing state. There are a lot of votes up for grabs there. It's also one of the top states when it comes to fracking.
And I was just in Pennsylvania. It's important to note that so many voters I spoke to there said fracking is not only a key industry for our state, it keeps our energy costs low. But let's talk about Donald Trump as well. If he's elected in November, what would he do? What do we know about his possible climate policy?
I mean, Donald Trump has been president before, and as soon as he took office, he took a lot of action when it comes to climate change, and a lot of it were things that really set the fight against climate change back. We could get a clue about what Donald Trump might do by something called Project 2025. And this is something that's been put together by an outside group. This is not part of his campaign. He's been very careful to distance himself from it. But there are people that have worked with him in the past that have also worked on this document, and it lays out a lot of pretty extreme steps when it comes to climate change. It would eliminate energy efficiency standards. It would end subsidies for electric vehicles. It calls for, of course, taking the U.S. again out of these sorts of international climate treaties. It wants to take the country out of all sorts of programs that would help other nations adapt to climate change. It would repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, Joe Biden's major policy that is really one of the biggest actions we've seen in the world in terms of battling climate change. So there's some hints there.
And let's look for a moment at his public statements on EVs and how they've changed since he got an endorsement from Elon Musk. So remember, he said he was pretty anti-electric cars, thought they were a bit of a con, talked about them being a scam. Then he said, no, I really like electric vehicles. They're good. Elon's a fantastic guy or something, he said. I mean, I have to say, in the same quote, he went on to say, we can't have 100% EV cars. They're very heavy. There are issues with them. But, you can see this is a man who is not noted for his consistency on these issues.
Well, Justin, you bring up a good point, right? Because Donald Trump obviously is a businessman. He's always said he loves a good deal, Sumi. And, when it comes to something like EVs, when it comes to solar panels, investing in green technology, a lot of people would say that is a good deal, that is a good business. Joe Biden, when he was out there and he was still campaigning for president, for re-election, was always talking about the number of jobs that he said the Inflation Reduction Act would be creating. So the question, I think it's a good one, Justin, is what would Donald Trump do if he were to become president again, if these policies turn out to be a success, if they do create those jobs? These could end up being pretty popular ideas and proposals that have been put in place already. And if these are creating thousands of new jobs, would he take those away? That's an open question, but we do know that Donald Trump is someone who loves jobs and loves a good deal, as he always says.
I've talked to the Biden administration about this, and they said, look, this is John Kerry, Biden's former climate envoy. John Kerry said, look, most of the jobs that the IRA are creating, most of the investment is in Republican states. So look, for example, at Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, for example, J.D. Vance's home state. And I said to John Kerry, do you think the Republicans will just rub it out and get rid of it? He said, look, it's going to be really hard for them to do that because there will be big constituencies of Republicans in these states saying, hold on a second, this flow of cash, these new jobs, these new industries are something that we really want in our states.
We've seen that from Kamala Harris on the campaign trail, too. She's not out there talking about overtly saying we need to solve climate change or saying, we need to reach this emissions target by this date. What she's saying is, we're creating jobs. She's been framing everything around a pocketbook and how climate change will be affecting people. During the debate against Donald Trump, she mentioned that a lot of people right now are being affected directly by climate change because it's affecting their home insurance. They're unable to afford insurance for their house because they might live in an area that's vulnerable to something like a wildfire, a tornado, a hurricane. These are the kinds of ways you see Democrats now trying to sell to skeptical, maybe even Republican voters, climate policies. And when you frame it around jobs, when you talk about the economy, it's a lot more popular than if you frame it as, well, what we're trying to do is solve this big global problem.
Climate change is a problem that transcends international borders, of course. So let's take a look at how the U.S. factors into the global discussion. And Justin, how much does the U.S. actually contribute to global carbon emissions?
The bottom line is, Sumi, it's a lot. So if you take the fossil fuel emissions, add in land use changes, the US emits about 6 billion tonnes of carbon a year. That's compared to like 10 billion tonnes for China. But of course, China's got a much bigger population. Other big countries, India, Russia, Brazil, Europe, we're talking more like 2 to 3 billion tonnes.
How significant do you think this U.S. administration has played in international climate action?
On the one hand, they've been a climate leader and passing legislation that is the world's biggest investment in the green transition is a big signal to the world, saying that the United States is taking this seriously.
We need transformative change and exponential impact. As nations, we must have the ambition that is necessary to meet this moment.
On the other hand, there's been a lot of criticism, obviously, due to the fact that the United States is still one of the top polluters in the world. It's become the #1 producer of oil and gas in the world.
How does that record that we just discussed of the Biden-Harris administration compare to what we saw during the time that President Trump was in office?
I mean, it's completely different. I mean, Trump was explicit. He didn't want to engage in the process. He thought that Paris was a way of forcing America to hobble its economy, and he promised, and then it went as soon as he was able to pulled America out of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is a sub-agreement of the UN process to tackle climate change.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
In a weird way, when the US pulled out, there was a kind of rallying of other countries who kind of almost bristling to show that, hey, we can still do important stuff even without you guys being in the party. So there was kind of global progress, but obviously without one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful economy in the world and one of the biggest emitters in the world at the table, obviously there is significantly less that can be achieved. So it really was a significant blow for the negotiations.
Justin, the UN's annual COP climate summit will actually be held just 6 days after the U.S. election. That is remarkable. What impact do you think that is having on pre-conference negotiations?
I think there is real pause for thought. People are really anxious about which way it'll go. And, we've discussed it internally, how we're going to cover it and what a big occasion it actually makes the beginning, not necessarily the end, but the beginning of this big UN conference will be a huge political event because it'll be either Trump will pull out, very dramatic, or we'll see, the first sense of what Harris wants to do in terms of her climate agenda. So it'll be a huge moment. It will set the tone for the next 4 years of climate negotiations and kind of, countries' approach. They'll all see it through the contents. Well, if America's not going to do that, what does that say about what I'm required to do?
We haven't talked yet about the voters themselves and what they think about climate change, climate policy. So when you speak to voters, what do they tell you about it?
That doesn't tend to be the top issue that people are voting for. You look at something like immigration, you look at the state of the economy, inflation, issues like abortion. Those tend to be much higher up on the list. At the same time, so many of these top issues, immigration, inflation, the economy, they're intrinsically linked to climate change. The other thing I think is it depends on how you talk about it. It depends on the way you have the conversation. Bringing up the word climate change and emissions and the Paris Agreement doesn't necessarily connect with a lot of voters in the United States. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of agreement. If you ask somebody, hey, do you want to be able to fish in your river? Do you want to be able to go out and hunt and have wildlife be there? Do you want this national park to stay protected? Do you care about, clean air and clean water in your city? People would say, absolutely, I do. I mean, these are pretty universal things.
Final question for both of you, starting with you, Justin. You kind of painted the stakes for us, but do you really get a sense that if the next president of the United States does not choose the right course when it comes to the climate over the next 4 years, that it could be too late?
We could see climate change of 2 degrees, 3 degrees. There will still be human beings here. What we're talking about is a world in which it's harder for human beings to survive, harder to grow food, harder to get reliable supplies of water, that kind of thing. That's the kind of things that's at stake. We're not talking about the extinction of humanity, certainly not yet, anyway. But obviously, every little degree matters. The more we can do now, the more clement, if you like, the temperatures for our distant generations that follow us will be. I suppose I'm contesting this idea of it being too late. It's never too late. We would still want to try and reduce future temperature rises, even if they're already quite warm and disruptive. So I suppose that's the qualification I'd make. But to the wider question, is this a really important moment for the world? And will the decision the US electorate make, is it important? The answer is yes, it is very, very important.
Time is running out, but it is not too late. But time is of the essence. And when you talk to scientists, what worries them are these tipping points that you look at across the world. There's several big ones where once you cross that threshold, there's no going back. So we're talking about melting ice in the polar regions of the world and a rapid rise in sea levels. You can't put that water back. If you look at the thawing permafrost in the Siberia region, that would release a huge amount of that methane gas, which warms the planet far faster even than CO2. If that starts to take place, things will just speed up even quicker. So big action is needed. It's needed now. But I think on a more hopeful note, I mean, there are also positive tipping points, and we're reaching some of those too. We've seen that already with the cost of solar panels. They've gone down so drastically that now solar is the cheapest form of electricity you can find. So that's a big tipping point. That means that many people who couldn't before are now starting to put up solar panels, afford them, build them. Countries around the world can now do that. That's a big deal. You even look at a country like China that people believe is now close to peaking in terms of its emissions. Other countries have started to do that too. So there are positive tipping points here too. And if climate policy in the US continues to go in the direction that it's been going over these past few years, we could see more of those positive tipping points. It's going to be a very interesting election. And I think if you ask anybody who pays attention to climate change, it's going to be very, very important.
Really interesting discussion. Thank you both so much. Justin, great to have you.
Cheers. Lovely to take part. Great to speak to you, Carl. I'll see you at the next COP conference, the next UN conference in Baku in Azerbaijan.
Looking forward to it, Justin. Always great to hear your voice and great to talk to you, Sumi.
Thanks so much, Carl. If you want more episodes of The Global Story, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Each day, we dive deep into a single story and bring you in-depth analysis from our correspondents around the world. Subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. Thank you for watching The Global Story. Goodbye.